Wanted to start by saying hi. My name is James Hughes, and I would like to welcome you to the Files, So Many Files Hive presentation. ATG is a platinum level Autodesk software provider. Sorry, just checking my volume real quick there. A platinum partner is someone who has the best customer service, best technical support, and best customer retention across authorized resellers. And I would like to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a licensed architect in the state of Arkansas and have 13 years of architectural experience. And for the past 4.5 years, I've been an AEC industry specialist with ATG. So my full-time job is to help architects, interior designers, landscape architects, engineers, and contractors with Autodesk software. And that includes training as well as a number of other technical services and support. And whenever I teach Revit fundamentals, I spend a good bit of time discussing best practices for content procurement and creation. And I've also gained a lot of practical experience with assisting firms to take control of their content libraries using different strategies. And I hope that you enjoy learning about the capabilities of Hive as a content management solution. As we go, if you guys have questions, go ahead and type those into the chat. And towards the end of the presentation, I will circle back and see if there are any questions that weren't answered during the presentation at the end. So let's talk about what our agenda is for this webinar. We're going to understand Hive as a complete content solution. This is an all-in-one solution for managing content curation and consumption. And whenever I do Revit trainings, I'm always asked where they should go to get content. So we're going to lead off with where do families come from? And then we'll introduce Hive and we'll take a look at general navigation within Hive. And then we'll show how to navigate Hive from within Revit. I have some project examples that we can walk through to show typical scenarios for how I can get content into my project. At the very end of the webinar, I will hit some points about general administration so that you can get a sense of what it's like to administer a Hive library. Okay, so where do families come from? As a result of answering this question in many different environments and having discussions that ranked these sources according to their pros and cons, this list has come about. Well, let's take a few minutes to go through best practices for content procurement. All of this list changes if you're utilizing Hive, but I want to show you what people have been taught and figured out for content procurement. And in fact, if you're utilizing Hive, you'll still have to go to these locations to be able to grab content for your eventual use in Hive. So content procurement is taking the freely provided work of someone else and changing it to suit your project needs so that you don't have to make everything from scratch every time. If you're making and creating content within Revit, that can be fully 1/3 of your total contract document production effort, both time and money. And because content creation represents such a large percentage of project time, any small efficiencies in this area can have proportionate savings to the overall budget. And this infographic serves as an order of operations. So you begin at the top, and then only if the content is available at that top shelf should you go to the next shelf down. And we'll talk about the pros and cons of each shelf as we go along. Shelf number one, you want your very first stop to be your Revit template file. A lot of companies slave over this thing, spending tens to maybe even 100 hours developing the template file as a one-time construct. And then they try to leave it alone for a year and quickly realize that it is a living document that has to be maintained. Template files require a major investment, but they're worth it because of the time savings that's multiplied out to all of their users. Some companies put too many files in their template file, and this can bog down their projects or increase the likelihood that incorrect families are used or the likelihood that corruption is introduced to all of their projects. Some companies put all of their families in the Revit template file. This is obviously a mistake and is not an act of curation. Some companies strip their Revit template file to contain next to nothing. And there is a Hive strategy that says to keep the Revit template file completely minimalist, but I'm going to advise you a little bit differently than that. So the guideline that I give people who are creating their template file is to put the content that you are almost certainly going to use. And that's what I like to put in quotes, is almost certainly going to use. The second stop, if you're not almost certainly going to use the Revit family, then it might be in the next shelf down, which is your curated network folder. And that folder is entirely different than a Revit download folder, because a curated network folder implies that someone is spending the time and effort to curate content by aggregating existing families, going out to get or procure new content, modify and change those families, test and flex them, and to add company standards for both aesthetics and data that get added to those families, and to put their stamp on it that certifies it as sort of safe to use for the company. Oftentimes, this job is given to one individual in a firm. And in larger firms, this is sometimes given to a small committee. To ensure quality, this can't be properly democratized to be everyone's job. Now, Hive can shake that up a bit, which we'll look at later. But in an ideal world, all of the content that you see in this stack or this list of 8 places could matriculate from the bottom of this list up to being entirely in trays 1 and 2. Now, nobody is there yet. Nobody's done the amount of work that it takes to get content up to that point, but it is possible. So when a firm is new to Revit or newly transitioned, they will actually have to go way down this list to the bottom many, many times. So shelf number 3 is a third step down. And a lot of people are surprised to see it this high in the listing is out of the box Revit content. And the reason it's this high in the list is that it is safe to use. Autodesk is not in the business of assuming liability for introducing families into your project that will break. So, the best virtues of out of the box Revit content is that it's safe and it's also generic to use. They're vague enough that they can represent a generic version of that thing. But the downside to this highly functional generic family is that it's modeled typically at around LOD 200. So if you need something that's higher LOD than that, then you're out of luck with out of the box Revit content, unless you modify the content to add the detail that you're missing. In fact, modifying out of the box Revit content is probably the smartest place to grab content to use as a starting place for a custom family. Tray number 4, next below that, is to get content from a previous project. Now, in an AutoCAD workflow, that's actually the top shelf of where you get content from. And in fact, it's typical to begin an AutoCAD project from a previous project and then modify it or gut it out. In Revit, we begin projects from a template file. If you have to go find content from a previous project in Revit, oftentimes that can take a while. So if I needed to find an overhead coiling door for a project that I'm working on, I might remember that a coworker like Scott has used an overhead coiling door in a previous project that he did. So if I ask where Scott is, if I don't see him in the office, I might be told that he had a client meeting and he'll be back in the afternoon. And when I finally see Scott and ask him which project it was that he used an overhead coiling door in, he may think it's either in one or another of school projects that he did months ago and give me those project numbers. And then I go find those project numbers by looking them up and finding the project name, finding the file, and opening them up. Now, as I look around, I don't know whether the overhead coiling doors will be there in a loading dock area, maybe in a concessions area, maybe in the cafeteria. But when I finally find the overhead coiling door, I should, if it's taken a long time from when I initially needed it, I should stop and ask myself an important question. If this door is so great, why didn't Scott do the work to curate it and place it up into shelf number 2? I don't even know if this door was the one he was thinking of, or even if it might break or have non-standardized content or missing shared parameters that my firm uses. So I don't know if this is a good piece of content to use either by finding it in this way. So not only did this little story take a few minutes to tell, you can see how this workflow typically is very time wasteful. The 5th tray, the next best place to get content from, is from a manufacturer. Now, some people get upset that I have manufacturers down in the 5th tray, particularly interior designers, mechanical engineers, and there are many cons to using manufacturers' content. The first con is that they tend to be over constrained. If a typical door family has 15 instance parameters in the properties palette on the side, a manufacturer's content will often have 50 instance parameters on the side. And many of them will be grayed out or associated with other parameters. Many times these will be run through a formula that determines what that parameter value will be. Oftentimes, over-constrained families will be unable to perform the action that you want them to perform. And I've run into this issue before with storefront system. I've downloaded a manufacturer's storefront family and been unable to make it turn a simple outside corner condition. If you try to edit a manufacturer's family, that's the worst case scenario of where to start customizing a family. Unless you're just simply erasing a couple of items off of the family, you're going to have to dig into the reasoning for each of those 50 parameters I was mentioning and begin to sort out which ones have to be kept in order to maintain flexibility of that family. And when you use manufacturer's content, it's almost always modeled to LOD 400. And not many projects require LOD 400 components. That's highly detailed. So when you put this highly detailed item into your relatively poorly detailed project, it does not have the effect of making your project look better. It has the effect of making your project look unfinished. Manufacturers' content can be bloated with thousands of texture files or unnecessarily dense geometry, and this will bloat your project. But now, if your intent with manufacturers' content is to simply place the objects and not edit them, then they can be fairly useful. And then I would agree with you, that you could actually bump this up the list, perhaps all the way up to the number 3 spot in this list. If you're simply going to get and place it without any alterations, it still has cons, but it's an easy lift for you. And after the number 4 place to get content, uh, I want you to notice in this list that you have now left the office. You're going outside of the office to get content. With that being said, you should protect yourself at all times, and also you get what you pay for. So the 6th place along this list, the next stop along the way is at BIM Object. And I put it above Revit City because it is a curated site that has manufacturers' content primarily within it, and it has a lot of content. According to BIM Object, they have more than 366,000 parametric BIM objects available for free download. But the thing that you need to know about BIM Object is that when you download a piece of manufacturer's content, logged in as with your email address, with your free account with them, it triggers an automatic qualified sales lead to be emailed to that manufacturer. In fact, this service is why they allow BIM Object to curate and provide their content for free. Now, that salesperson probably won't call you seconds after you download the content. They may wait a while and look you up in their database first. So now you're in their sales funnel and will likely need to deal with an inbound attention around your interest in their product. So if you're just trying to hurry up and get a project done, consider whether you want to spend effort engaging with vendors as a trade-off for that. 7th step in the list here is Revit City. Revit City has saved designers hundreds of thousands of hours corporately by providing user-hosted content free to download and use as you wish. And that sounds amazing, and it certainly has its utility and assistance to designers. Broken families provided by Revit City is the single largest source of Revit project corruption in the industry. They have 1.2 million members and 20,000 plus parametric BIM objects available free to download. And they have a misleading rating system that simply reports number of stars and number of downloads. So I advise people to never download content from Revit City directly into their project. I would at least use a proxy project first, or better yet, test and flex each parameter of the object before utilizing it in your project. And this can save a lot of time in realizing the content is not what you want, so you never even embedded it into your project. This keeps you from having to remember to purge it later on. Broken families are not usually created by a person with malicious intent. They're typically created by someone who's fairly comfortable in the family editor, but forgot to, lock a constraint or create a parameter to fix an issue. And as soon as you stretch or change the object in a way that they didn't intend or test for, that family can break. And when families break, they contribute to project corruption. Believe me, part of what I deal with is support around Revit, and corrupted projects are a very real and present danger. 8th place, last scenario is to make the content from scratch. It's actually pretty infrequent that you create content from scratch, because normally you'll modify a family that's close to what you want rather than beginning from scratch. And creating a new family is not really from scratch, because it starts from a Revit family hosted template file, an RFT file, which has baked in behaviors such as wall hosted, ceiling hosted, and can also have and will have baked in required system parameters like mark and type mark and cost. So this takes us through the best practice of where to procure families if you don't have Hive, And in just a minute, I'll show you the workflow that Hive users leverage. So what is Hive? Hive is an industry-leading content navigation system developed specifically for the AEC industry. Firms can organize, manage, set permissions, and ensure that the latest content is kept up to date and available for all project participants, even when working remotely. Users can quickly find Revit, AutoCAD, PDF, images, and any other file types quickly using libraries, tags, favorites, and file metadata. It's often an inconvenience when you need to be at your desk or in front of your computer to execute on basic user management tasks. Sometimes we're out of the office or standing at the user's desk.
No, because that'll be really skewed.
Hang on just a second.
Because some of the buildings are
make
small.
sure that I mute everybody.
Hang on a second.
There we go. So the account management portal allows company administrators to generate and regulate access to the Hive suite of tools. And this doesn't require a Windows desktop with Hive running. It used to, but the online portal is an evolution of the Hive offering. And with the account management, you can do group management. There will often be times when access to Hive libraries need to be controlled consistently for multiple users, and the Hive group management web interface makes that process very easy. It has user management. Adding new users is a process that can be entirely done via the web interface, and any company administrator can easily open the web page, add a user, and make group associations from anywhere there is a web connection. Active Directory Synchronizer, Hive includes a utility that can be installed, allowing users and groups to be automatically synchronized with the Active Directory. So when IT adds or removes users, the Active Directory Synchronizer tool can be set to run to also trigger those same updates in the Hive account management system. Now, the name of the presentation is Files, So Many Files, Hive. It was named this because of the reality of struggling to curate files for ease of consumption and then realizing just how many files there are and how complicated a process that can be. Usually, the BIM coordinator will set up a file naming convention and file pathing system that covers all of the distinctions that they need to make in subcategorizing content like Revit content, but the system only makes sense to them usually. And then they have to document that process and educate the design team how to search for their content or the content that they placed. Sometimes users can easily get lost or waste time in company standard folder navigation. Folder structure doesn't display critical file details or tags. File names can't distinguish which content is appropriate for use in projects, and maintaining, updating, and improving content libraries across multiple departments and locations can be tedious for BIM management. And for this, we've got content browsing. So users can leverage Hive to quickly search and find the exact content that they require for use in their projects. And when users can find what they need quickly and efficiently, they can be significantly more productive. Partners and firms don't tend to understand just how much time is wasted in looking for and loading content into a project. So if about a third of project time is object creation and procurement thereof, any design efficiencies in this area are going to have a great value. Design models won't grow in size, file size unnecessarily from too much loaded content, which means that the project is going to run more smoothly and can be more easily navigated. When we talk about design application specialization, we're saying that Hive is designed to run within design tools like Revit. It's a one-stop shop for content that makes Hive easy to implement, enabling users to work at their most efficient pace. You've got the ability to search and filter. You can perform a simple word search and then filter that to only show the category or the content that you're interested in. I've wasted many minutes just scrolling through Revit City, hoping to find a piece of content because the stream of results was not filtered. Within Hive, we got the ability for tagging. Sometimes it's desirable to make content a little bit more searchable, and tagging can be used kind of like a hashtag. Can be used to add any extra piece of metadata to content to enable even better search results and faster searching by end users. We can search result metadata. We'll actually take a look into parameter values and surface that data as a searchable thing. Whenever we have frequent searches that we keep performing, we can save them and save time down the road as well with those saved searches. And with that, it'll remember all the filter settings that we had to be able to jump right to the desired content. And then we've got the ability to take a look at content details, which I'll show you on screen, as ability to take a look at more information right before we load the piece of content into our design software. And then lastly, that best part, or what I think is the best part about Hive, is how the content loads into your design software. You just simply drag and drop it in, or you can double click it inside of Hive, or you can choose the load button. I mean, I guess there's three ways to do it, but I prefer drag and drop, and it's that easy. You just grab a piece of content you want and drag it in. So, if we were revising those 8 steps of where you need to go to curate content for your users that are leveraging Hive, what's the new best practice for those who leverage Hive? As you can see on screen, it's very simple. Step 1 is still the same. You would first go to your template file for the content that you are almost certainly going to use, and then opening up your type selector. That's still going to be the fastest way to access that content. And what Hive has done is it has taken trays 2 through 8 and rolled them all up into one. So we're no longer empowering users to run out to Revit City as soon as they want to look for content. This empowers users to simply go to Hive and search for curated, trusted content. And if you've taken time to continually curate this Hive system, you don't want people going outside of this new ecosphere to find content that has all of those cons that we spent a while covering just a little bit ago. Now there's no way for everything that they need. There isn't a way for everything that they need to be in Hive. That you just don't have the ability to predict everything before users need it, or predict all of the content they need. So users or consumers have several tools to get content from within Hive. They have the ability to say, hey, I have this content already and I want to submit it for review and fixing so that it can be on Hive. Or I've finished this project. I ran through the new postmortem process to identify viable families that should be considered for addition to Hive. And here are the 6 families that we identified as good candidates for these 2 different content libraries. And this allows you to democratize the act of growing Hive library by putting some responsibility on the project managers to identify the families that were heroes for them and get it added to the library. We've seen this as the healthiest implementation of the Hive system. And they also have the ability to place a request for content to be added to Hive. And then someone can procure that in a responsible way and make it available when it's ready. All 3 of these processes have an automated email system that will either alert a library admin that new content is ready for their consideration, or an automated email that content is requested by a consumer. All right, so we are looking at a screenshot of the Hive interface. Now, we're logged in as an admin, so you're seeing all of the features of Hive on that left-hand side. A person whose permission level was set to consumer would not have access to all of these features. Before we get started, it is important to note that Hive is intended to be used by everyone in the firm, not just the Revit users. It can be just as valuable for the office manager, for your receptionist, or your spec writer, as well as it is for the BIM manager. Now, this image shows the interface when the Hive application is opened directly, meaning not through Revit. So if you were to just double click and open Hive icon on your Windows desktop, it would open up this interface. The basic set of tools is located along the left margin, highlighted in red. We'll dive into these a little more as we move throughout the presentation. Hive allows the admin team to control which team members have full access to all of the tools and which team members have a more limited set of standard tools. A standard user will have access to the tools highlighted in red, which include Search, Discover, Saved Searches, Requests, and About. An admin user will have access to all of the tools of a standard user, with the addition of libraries, content, add content, company settings, tags, and users and groups. The top center portion of the interface includes a search content dialog. This is very similar to a Google search. For instance, you could enter in several words and it will search all of those words in a cumulative fashion. or you can use parentheses around 2 or more words to narrow the search. The center portion of the Hive interface is allocated to a series of shortcuts. The top portion of the shortcuts is a section called My Saved Searches. A lot of people, unfortunately, don't bother to save settings in the programs that they use, like Revit. Some people will save their print settings in Revit because they realize how many minutes they can waste each day setting all of the settings again and again for print results. There's some significant time savings within Hive if you save your search settings with the filters in place for content that you frequently search for. These saved searches show up right here under My Saved Searches for single-click repetition of a search. The second shortcut section is allocated to libraries. All content that is hosted in Hive is added to different libraries that you set up. These libraries could be divided up in any method that is most useful to the firm. So you don't have to divide them up in the way that we have. Here, where you see OOTB, that means out-of-the-box Revit content. And that's just one facet to our company database of families. If you were specifically looking for out-of-the-box Revit 2020 content, you could go directly to this library and see everything that's included within it. And this will be for browsing that content. You could also have a library specifically for the admin team or specifically for the marketing team. If you have different types of documents like HR documents or new employee documents, you can create libraries that help them to find that content that's bookmarked separately from within Revit families. At the bottom, we see the section for tags. Tags can be added to any file or content to assist in searching this content at a later time. This example shows some materials like fabric, marble, and tile. So if you're producing a rendering with these materials, you could open this tag directly and see all the materials that are using this particular tag to automatically narrow your search or to search across multiple libraries. I often recreate materials in Revit because I no longer have easy access to materials that I created in previous projects. Huge time savings to carry those materials forward and have them tagged for ease of consumption. The right side of the Hive interface includes a series of filters, and these are very powerful. This is what I will spend most of our time today demonstrating so that we can have searches that return usable content, demonstrating so that we have searches that, so we have usable content rather than similarly named content. As you invest time into developing your Hive libraries, you're going to need the ability to filter out content and to drill down to specific content that would otherwise be difficult to find. You can see that this includes libraries and tags as optional filters. If you use the shortcuts previously described, these sections will automatically fill themselves out with these items. Hive includes a rating system. You can see that there in the middle, where users can be granted the ability to rate content. You may actually turn that off if you want to as an admin. So if you are blessed enough to grow a library where you want the ability to distinguish between below average refrigerators versus excellent refrigerators, you have the ability to filter by rating. For broken content, if you load something and it turns out it's broken, you would want to submit a comment on it that alerts the Hive team that the content breaks in a specific way, rather than just saying it's 1-star content. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into an example here. We'll start by opening up Hive directly from the Hive icon, not through Revit. And so this is the Hive shortcut directly on my desktop here. And here we have our interface. It's a standalone program, and it does have a Revit add-in too, which we'll see later. And it does have all of the tools we talked about on the left-hand side. You can collapse them, and you can also bring them back by clicking the collapse and then that triple dot button on the bottom. On the right-hand side, where we have the filters, those two can be collapsed down, or they can be expanded back by clicking that filter or funnel icon in the top of the screen. In the center, you have all of the shortcuts, save searches, libraries, and tags. If I wanted to look at everything that's included in the ATG support documents library, I can click on that library shortcut, And here we see this detailed list view of all the documents in the ATG support documents library. And notice that these are not Revit families. You can tile them or you can do a list view. And say, for example, if you wanted to find information on how our support team is supposed to utilize Zendesk, well, you can scroll down to the zendesk.docx document. And this is huge because we can now provide so many more documents to our design team that they might otherwise have to track down a person or an email search from years ago to find. And you can include standard practices like how to complete a code search or standard BIM implementation plans. And when this information is no longer siloed into different email inboxes or with different users, this makes your entire company have access to more information than they normally would have. Documentation can be Word files, PDFs, any type of document can be included in HIVE. And when a supporting document is open, we could leave it open while we follow steps or get an answer to a question. We could print it for reference. We could download it and send it to someone else. Or we could just tell them to do a search for it in HIVE. So let's do this a different way. Let's go back to the search function. And we can type in star Zendesk. And this simply means that if the file name has any other words before it says Zendesk, then it will still show that file. And that limits our search to, in this case, one file in this library. And we'll open this up and close that. And we can click our home button to jump back to our home screen. And we'll take a look at the filters on our right-hand side. And this is a powerful way to get to the content that you need. Up here, you have all of the libraries. You could hit a check mark and it would check all of them at once, or you could uncheck them all. Or you could just limit your search to just the ATG support library. And by here, we can actually change how it's going to sort it. We can sort it by relevance, name, or several other sorting methods. And here are available tags that we can filter by. Now, this is a powerful way to find the correct content without having to name the file with 15 pieces of abbreviation in order to distinguish it. And we choose the tag of support so that it excludes content that does not have that tag. And if you know that content was added within the past couple of days, then you could filter your search with added between and updated between to find that recent content. All right. I'll open this up. And here we've opened the support document up for a support process. This is a step-by-step with small screen capture graphics. This is a most excellent way to generate a process for a user to follow. You might do this for standards or for starting a Revit project or for anything down to like how to acquire coordinates from the architect's model if you're the engineer. You can create process documents for how your company performs those steps according to your company workflows. Maybe you're doing things with phasing to control graphics that probably no other firm is doing. You can have a process document to help explain that that's very searchable and findable in everybody's hands. So you don't want one person to be the keeper of that knowledge. That person actually usually doesn't want to be the only keeper of that knowledge either. And HIVE allows you to disseminate all of your rich institutional knowledge to the whole team. All right. And when you're done, you can clear out the filters and apply that. And you can hit the home button. I like to do that because it sort of clears out what I was previously searching for. So the next time that I come around, I'm ready to go with a fresh search. Sometimes though, if I'm searching related content, I won't clear it out because I might actually leverage the filters that were set on the previous setting. Next, we're going to take a look at HIVE through the lens of a Revit user. HIVE offers a Revit add-in that allows you to access HIVE directly from the Revit ribbon. And when accessed in this method, a few more options are available that are specific to the Revit user. At first glance, this may look very similar to the HIVE interface that we just reviewed. That's because it is very similar. It has all of the same functionality of a non-Revit user, plus it has some additional features. You can see a few more filters have been added here on the right-hand side. You have the ability to search Revit content only. That's checked by default. You can filter by Revit category like door, window, stair, etc. You can also filter by Revit version as well. Now, this is not necessary if you're trying to bring forward older family content. That process where Revit upgrades your older content still works the same way. But you might need this feature if you're running, let's say, Revit 2019, but some of your company has been upgraded to Revit 2020 and they're already producing content in that new format that won't work in your older version of Revit 2019. So take a look at the bottom center. A new shortcut section has been added that's called Revit Categories. And when you're first starting out in Hive and your libraries are still kind of modestly sized, you may want to click on a shortcut category here and browse all of that type. For example, if you know that you want to find some Revit casework content, you have the ability to browse directly to that content from these shortcuts. And after your library becomes larger, though, or after you already have in mind specific content that you're wanting, it will be faster to search for content using filters and tags typically. So let's take a look at how we can leverage Hive from a Revit workflow directly from within Revit. Here we are on a floor plan, and we're going to start by modeling some exterior walls. And we'll create a really simple building to demonstrate how Hive can be implemented. We'll use our rectangle draw tool. And after we've created the 4 walls, we can select those walls and see in our type selector that we are just using a generic 8-inch wall. And once we're underway in the schematic design process, I might reach a point of decision where I'm ready to transform these walls into brick on metal stud walls. So we browse down into the project browser under families and walls. We can confirm that only these 2 wall types have been loaded here. Now, we have a couple of ways to solve this issue of not having the wall type that we need already in the project. We could transfer project standards from another project. So we'd go to manage and we click on transfer project standards. And first I would have to find another project with that specific wall. And then I would open that project tandemly to my current project. You would have to have the correct project selected when you begin that process, or it won't work. In fact, you just saw that I don't have another project open, so Revit shut me down as I was describing that process. Another method we could use, we could duplicate an existing wall type. And this is what most architects are doing. This actually takes more time and effort normally. So if I take this existing generic 8-inch wall and duplicate it, and you need to make sure that you duplicate it, and then we're going to rename it to what we need. Then you can edit the type, you can edit the structure. We can manually insert each substrate within the wall, defining its function, material, thickness, etc. as I go. And I can't tell you how many times I have remade a wall type because it was slightly faster to waste time making it again rather than searching for it in a previous project. Both are wasteful approaches. Now, walls are a unique item within Revit because they're a system family. And that means that they aren't saved out as a .rfa file that you could then load into a project. And that means that the only way to make more of them or different versions of them is to duplicate them and manually change them to what you need. Now, a lot of firms will create a walls project that has 100 different wall types within it, and they expect users to browse the whole floor plan like it's kind of like a supermarket and grab the 20 or so walls that they think that they need through copy and paste. Now, the feedback that I hear from this process is that it is difficult to navigate to the wall that you need because it's either in a field of standard spaced walls or it's sometimes clustered with walls that you wouldn't think that it should be grouped with. So Hive solved this problem much better. Hive, even as a differentiator for its competition, actually is able to save out system families like walls and make them discrete elements available in a very searchable library, a Hive library. So you can easily grab several walls and drag and drop them into your project. Delete that out. So if we go to the CTC software and we launch Hive, we can do a search from within a particular library. We can choose our out-of-the-box Revit content. We're going to hit the check mark to select all of the libraries. And we can start by doing a search for walls. And wow, that's not just wall families that get returned. That's actually lots of different content. We have wall tags, anything that had the word wall within it. If we scroll this list, only actually precious few of these are walls. We have some wall hosted elements. We have curtain wall mullions. We need ways to be able to refine a search that is otherwise casting too wide of a net. So we're going to narrow down this content with some filters. Now, thankfully, it's already only looking at Revit content. That's checked. Our most beneficial way of filtering this search is going to be to filter down to only show walls from the wall category within Revit. So we'll check walls. And if we apply this, it should really narrow down our results. Every one of these pieces of content is a wall. If we want to be more specific, we can change our search to exterior walls or exterior wall. And now it's looking for exterior and wall, both in the name and the metadata. If we find this brick on metal stud, I can just drag and drop it into Revit project environment, which is in the background. And you watch it appear in the project browser, confirming that it's loaded into the project. Now I've closed Hive, but you could leave that running. You can select all these walls at once, and in one move in the type selector, I can change them over to that new wall type that I loaded. I don't have to stop my schematic design process and try to predict the eventual wall type that will be used. I can place generic walls carefully justified to the exterior face, knowing that later a project manager will load in the wall type that's become necessary to change it to, and all of that generic wall type will change very painlessly. And we can see those exterior walls are completed here and save the project. So next up, we'll take a look at creating some interior walls from within a Revit process. All right, we're going to go back to the same wall command. We'll select generic 8-inch wall again. And we're going to draw a small lengthwise and transverse wall here. And I'll copy some of the walls down the way here, check multiple, check constrain. And I can also utilize the dimension tool to equally space these interior walls. I do need to tie it to the structural grid on the outside. That's going to allow me to equal space them and get rid of the dimension. And for these longitudinal walls, I can just offset these 3 feet on each side, get rid of the middle one, and I've got a 6-foot wide corridor. I use split elements to split each of these walls into 2. And then I'll do a trim extend multiple to trim these walls back from the corridor. And we'll do the same thing on the bottom side here. And next up, we'll delete this inner segment with this option here. And that'll help us to start to create a vestibule space. Offset this wall next. Extend that, trim that, and we've got a vestibule there. And we're going to take a look at the wall types that we have loaded. And we don't have any interior wall types, so we're going to leverage Hive to load in more wall content. And we could have left Hive running in the background, but launching it again is fast if you just want to keep your screen real estate. And you can see that because I didn't clear out my previous search, those same settings are still in Hive, and all of those filters are still applied on the right-hand side. I can change this to an interior wall search. There we go. And it's not a perfect search. You know, somehow some exterior walls made it through. And I could have used tags to fix that, but I still have a very legible search. And I'm going to look for a 4 7/8 inch just standard partition. And we'll just drag that into the project workspace just like that. And you can see that the new interior wall type gets added to the project, and it's ready to place new ones of that type. But I'll grab all of these interior walls in the project and change them over. Oops, missed one. There we go. And we have all of the wall content that we needed. I didn't have to jump through the hoops to transfer project standards or spend 3 minutes creating a duplicate wall type. I know that I've done that way too many times in the past. And that's what happens when it's nobody's job to add things to the template file. That kind of wasted time occurs. So next up, we'll add some doors, and we'll use Hive to help us with that. All right, so let's say that we want to add some doors. If you didn't have any doors loaded in the project, it's rare. You'll see this warning, but let's load some through Hive. And we'll do a search for a double door. And all right, so the search does return several doors. It does return double door cabinets, sashes, windows. Some of these simply have door in the name. So let's take a look at some more of these. Sometimes just marvel at how elements can show up in an open search like this. So we're going to set some filters here in just a second. The annotation. All right, so over here in our filters area, let's see, I'm going to hit the check mark next to the Revit version. And in our categories, and that has the effect of setting it to my current version. By category here, we are going to choose to filter this to doors. Where are you? There you are. We'll go ahead and apply those filters there. All right, and we can also add exterior to the search if we wanted to. We can use the, let's see, double light. Yeah, we'll use the double light door here. So interestingly, it's popped up with a type catalog for that family. You've probably seen this with out-of-the-box Revit content. So if there's lots of types of a family, and I would recommend if you were putting these together, creating types of families, if you do more than 5 types of a family, you might look at authoring a content library like this. There's some processes for doing that inside of Excel. But you don't want to load all of those family types. You want to be able to choose which ones out of the library that you want. And that keeps you from having to purge out the unused ones later. And in fact, you can actually see a T icon that appears underneath some of these families, indicating that it does have a type catalog associated with it. So we can select the 84-inch tall doors here. You could just do one, but if we wanted to select several, we've got the ability to hold down control and select all of the 84-inch doors if we want. And that lets us load in all of those at once. All right, and I just don't have any tags loaded for them yet, but you can see that the 84-inch doors get loaded into the project browser. I can leave Hive open to do another search. Do a search for a single door. And there's also an ability to take a look at a detail pane. So over here, if we open up a detail pane, I'll need to give it a minute because it's reading the metadata for that door. All right, and it will serve up more information on that family so I can make a decision about the door. It opens up that sidebar there with more information, has path, file size, all of the family types enumerated out. Kind of take a look at these types here. And you can go to a grid view if you wanted to after looking at the details. You can also go to a list view. That's our grid view there. All right, with this double light door, let's go ahead and load all of the 84-inch tall types or versions of this family. There we go. And over in the project browser, those types are loaded in. And we'll also grab, let's do some single flush doors. So we'll grab all of those that are 84 inches tall as well. All right, and those single panel doors show up in the project browser as well. Now, I don't normally place them into the project like this, but you can, just like with generic annotations, you can actually see them in your project browser or select them from your project browser. You can actually just drag and drop them over into the Revit workspace to place it. So normally I just start the door command first. So we can place these double doors for our entry and for the vestibule. And we can change over and go to our single doors for our next bit here. We'll place these at our exits, one on each end. Okay, and we'll change it one more time and we'll insert our typical interior doors as single doors. Place this guy. And normally I would nudge to move the doors around, but you can select the temporary dimension and change it to move it closer. Or you can select it, move it closer still. And from here, I'll just copy it around to the other rooms, multiple, constrained. And we'll go wall to wall. All right, copy this guy down. And after I align that, that's easy. After I finish this left side by copying this a couple more, then the idea is, since this is symmetrical, we should just be able to take these three and mirror that across. Boom. Okay. All right, save that. And then last thing it will do is to tag these lastly. So if I go to the annotate ribbon and I choose tag by category, it's possible to not have a tag loaded for a type of category. I hate seeing that, but you've probably seen that before. And a lot of people are going to keep their standard tags preloaded into their project templates, and I do recommend that you do that. But you could keep your project template lean like this one is and load the tags from Hive, or you could have alternate tags in Hive that you only use sometimes. And these can then be easily loaded from Hive. So here we've launched Hive, and we could search for star door tag. And we're looking for the appropriate company standard door tag, and it produced a lot of results for both tag and door. And we got categories and we've got versioning here. We can also change our search here to revise it to put it in quotation marks. So we can put quote door tag, quote. And this time it will limit my list to these two that exactly say door tag. And I just double click it and it adds that annotation to my project. Clear it out and you can go home. The fastest way to annotate these is to click on tag all not tagged underneath the annotate ribbon. And we can check door, it's this top one, and we can tag doors that were loaded retroactively to when they were placed. Now it's randomly chosen the order of the door numbers according to which order they were placed. It used the 200s here on floor one. So I'm going to use the BIM project suite, which has a free tool called the renumbering tool. There it is. We'll fire that up. Choose the doors tab. There we go. And tell it that we want to start with 101. And we want to make sure that we check auto swap. And now I can just click these in the order that I want them renumbered. And if that number already exists and it's assigned to another door, it grabs it and swaps it without ever giving me that warning pop-up that we would get to cancel, well, in this case, probably 16 times in a row here otherwise. And you can see that Revit steals the focus while a renumbering tool is sort of intelligently staying in the foreground. And this is the way to renumber doors, rooms, grids, and views inside of Revit. So we're coming up on our time here. So I want to give you a quick verbal summary of some more features that Hive can do for you. I almost said do to you. And then we'll get to our question section here. So you can create all kinds of schedules that quantify, provide square footage, or return information for your clients that they'll find valuable. And you can create those schedules and store them in Hive. A lot of companies aren't doing that, and they're not creating those schedules because they don't want to confuse their users and have them think that they belong as part of the construction documents. But if you have them in Hive, it's really easy for a project manager to look up some quantification schedules or area or some cost schedules and kind of drag that into the project, and then suddenly have kind of some very valuable information on hand. You have the ability to place a request for content, documents, families. You can state which library that you think it should be added to. You can, when you're making that request, you can describe in detail what you're needing. So if you wanted to verbally describe, a file or a door type that you don't have, there's a blank that allows you to type in a novel if you want about what you're looking for. And then you can also, while you're making the request, select it as having a low, normal, or high priority to the request. I do urge you not to mark everything as high request, because then people will stop believing you. And you can request a new or existing tag to be tagged on it as well. Also, underneath that request feature, you can select files to upload to the request if you already have procured them, or if you've already made a document or made a family and you're saying, hey, I think this belongs in this Hive library. You can attach that file, and it's not going to push it directly into Hive, but it will automatically email an admin of that library group for them to kind of finish that curation process to make sure that shared parameters that need to be pushed to it, that work is done before it's uploaded into Hive. And as a Hive library admin, you probably do want to enable your users to have the ability to place requests and to be able to tag content themselves, because if they struggle finding something, they're probably the best ones to be able to tag that, unless you've just got some jokesters or people that like to make inappropriate tags. You might need to sort of hammer down on that and make it an admin only thing. And so you've also got the ability as an admin to manage requests. It actually keeps track of all of them. You can set the status to them. As an admin, you've also got the ability to invite users to your libraries and set their permissions as consumers or contributors, library admins, or company admins. Now, as a company admin, you have the ability to create new libraries and have Hive harvest entire folders of content, or you could carefully bring in content a file at a time. When you invite others into the libraries, you want to set up groups of users instead of trying to manage permissions and access at a user level. And then you can just set that group as having access to which libraries is appropriate to them. And just like Windows has group permissions and even has Active Directory, which Hive also supports as well. As you add content to libraries, you can create new tags as needed. So even if someone didn't request it, if you see a need for a new tag, you've got the ability to create that as an admin. You can select existing tags and make it automatically tagged to incoming content that you select for Hive to batch process. So if you've got a bunch of, a whole folder worth of families, you can make sure that a tag gets batch added to all of those files, so it's less manual. Company admins have access to setting company settings, which include choices such as where content is cached, and other company-wide settings such as whether users can add content or rate content, whether users can submit requests or tag families themselves without an admin request. And as a company admin, you have the ability to revoke or set access to different features of the Hive software. So just wrapping up the presentation and demo, Hive allows searching all content independent of folders. That's actually one of the worst ways to try to organize this, is make people search and drill down through lots of subfolders and then realize, oh wait, this content kind of belongs in several other subfolders, and do we duplicate that or not? Hive searches the specific attributes within the content. That's that metadata we were talking about earlier. That includes custom tags and categories. content can be hosted in the cloud. That's kind of a differentiator for Hive. You don't even have to have good VPN access. Any of your users will have access to this cloud hosted content, even if they're working remotely, as long as they have access to that cloud content. Or you could make it exclusively on your local network if you did not want it to be cloud hosted. Users experience instant consumption of files. I can't stress this enough. You simply double click a file and it's there. So I'm not scrolling through manufacturer sites trying to find things. I just load it in Hive and there I go. And lastly, it allows design software specific consumption. You guys saw how it's integrated into Revit, and I was just kind of demonstrating how I can jump back and forth between Hive and Revit in a typical workflow. So this concludes the webinar Files, So Many Files, Hive. As you can see, this is an extremely powerful search engine for firm-specific files and content. It streamlines the workflow for all users into a single, simplified content management solution. If anyone's interested in learning more about Hive, we'd welcome the opportunity to have one-on-one conversation with you. You can see our contact information there on screen, and you can contact me or any of our sales consultants to discuss next steps. And at this time, I'm going to take a look into the chat, see if we have any questions that may have been queued up. All right, I've got a question. James, how are groups or teams established within Hive? Do people join their company database when they sign up? Does the Hive manager for the company manage access to new users? Well, I have kind of covered that as we kept going on, but let me reiterate for you. You've actually got 3 different ways to manage your Hive user database. Now, I do apologize. This Hive presentation was more about how do I organize the files more so than how do I set permissions. But you have the ability to add users individually, which will send them an email address. So you enter their name and email, and it invites them, and they verify that by clicking a link. And you could manage their permissions on an individual basis. I don't recommend that unless you've only got a handful of people on staff. If you've got any number of people that you might look at using groups, that's going to be a better way to do it. And you can set up your own group groupings within Hive through that admin portal. We just described it. We didn't take a look at that process. We do have some other videos that kind of show how to set that up through the admin portal. And then lastly, you can also set it up if you've already got an IT department that has you set up with Active Directory. You can have that sync to your Hive settings, and as group permissions change or people are added in Active Directory, it will also matriculate that down to Hive and make those changes automated for you. So 3 kind of powerful ways to be able to set up those users and permissions. I got another question. How are new users added to a group paid for? I I probably shouldn't try answering this question when I can't say 100%, but I'm not sure that that Hive is paid for on a per user basis, but they purposely keep me away from the billing side of this so I don't get bogged down in the sales side of it. So if as long as you are adding users, the management of that is simple. Unfortunately, you'd have to contact a product rep for more information about pricing, whether or not that affects the pricing of Hive. So appreciate the question. I'll leave the chat open for another couple of seconds here to see if any other questions come in before we wrap up. If any of them kind of come in late, then I guess what I'll do is just take a look at them and email out an answer to that at a later time. And so when this concludes, you guys will receive a link to be able to revisit this content if you need to consider Hive, at a later time. There's also there's a lot of time to be saved in the area of content procurement. I hope we've kind of made that clear, that content procurement and curation. So I hope that this was valuable to you guys in learning some of Hive's capabilities. Oh, I got another question here. After you add a project, can you then extract model information into Hive? You can upload files. And so if you have access to the RFA files, the project files within that project, I would just make it a standard postmortem process to grab those hero files and save them out in a folder, and then attach those as a request inside of Hive and say, hey, these are great families. I think they belong in these folders or these libraries. And then that ultimately leaves it up to your Hive library admins, who will be automatically get an email alerting them that someone has placed that request. And then they can open up those files and test and flex them and make sure, if they need to use any family fixing tools, which CTC also has, or even something simple like Parameter Jammer to be able to push shared parameters to them. They can kind of finish that work out and then host it inside of Hive. But not really a fully automated way where you just hand it an RVT project file and Hive strip everything out of that for you. I might bring that up later and see if there's some way for it to kind of, well, I mean, if you guys have purged content before, you know that a Revit project can have just thousands of files, but we'll check and see if there's some kind of batch stripping way to be able to do that maybe in the future, but not any that I'm aware of right now. All right. So I appreciate this, guys. And if you guys would like more information on Hive, you can contact me at my contact information there. I can get you in touch with your product rep. If you don't if you don't know their name, that's perfectly fine. And then they would love to have that conversation with you about what Hive implementation could look like for you guys. So thanks again for your time, and we hope that you'll join us again soon. Thanks. Goodbye.